build to awe, then drop low. The men who put a bullet in his back were the same men he would have died to protect. That betrayal should have been the end of Master Sergeant Ezra Cole. Instead, it was the first page of how a discarded soldier, murdered, thrown away, and reborn in the body of a dying child, became the most feared king this world would ever know. This is the story of the Greymarch. And like every story worth telling, it begins at the very bottom. His name was Ezra Cole, call sign, Wraith, and for 11 years, across 4 wars, he had been the best his country ever had. Tomorrow, he was going home. Tomorrow, for the first time in his life, he was going to be done. He never heard the shot. The first round took him in the back, and as he turned, the whole world fell out from under him, because the men standing over him, rifles raised, weren't the enemy. They were his brothers, the men he had carried out of the fire, the only family a man like him had ever known. Nothing personal, Sergeant. You just know too much. And there it was, after every war, every wound, every impossible thing he had survived. In the end, it wasn't the enemy that killed him. It was the people he trusted most. He went down into the mud. The rain came soft and cold across his face, and in those last few seconds, Ezra Cole didn't feel fear. He felt something quieter, and so much worse. He felt alone. The dark rose up to take him, and the very last thought of a dying soldier was a simple, stubborn one. If I ever get the chance to do this again, I'm doing it right. The world should have ended there. It was only just beginning. Pain. Not the soft fate of death. Pain. Searing. Electric. Alive. His chest heaving. His heart slamming like it was trying to break out of him. He sat up gasping, and his own scream came out small, high, wrong. He looked down at his hands, and they weren't his. Soft, tiny, shaking, the hands of a child. A woman was sobbing somewhere close, clutching at him, crying a name over and over, a name that wasn't his, and through the chaos, the words began to land. Poison. He stopped breathing. He's alive. Gods, he's alive. Ezra Cole, who had died face down in the mud of another world, was awake. In a warm bed, in a room of candlelight and gray stone, in the body of a small, dying boy. The child's name had been Cael Ardyn, 8 years old, the 3rd son of a noble house, unwanted, overlooked, worth less than the hounds in his father's hall. Someone had poisoned the boy over a title that would never even have been his. And in the half-breath between that child's death and the silence that should have followed, something reached across the void and poured a betrayed soldier into a murdered boy. He didn't understand it, but he was breathing. He was alive. And after dying alone in the rain, being alive at all felt like a miracle he had no right to. He was not going to waste it. That's when the world went silent, and a line of light wrote itself across his vision, clean and bright and impossible. Architect, online, observe, comprehend, build. He had seen targeting systems, heads-up displays. This was none of those. This was something that should not exist, and it was waiting on him. The maid at his bedside wiped her eyes and pressed a cool cloth to his brow. A small thing, a nothing thing. Skill observed, field dressing, comprehended. And just like that, he knew it. Completely, as though he had done it 10,000 times. The soldier's mind went very, very still, because all at once, He understood exactly what he had been given. Anything he saw, anything he watched, even once, this system would take apart, learn, and hand back to him mastered. And all of it, layered on top of a lifetime of war, of strategy, of a soldier who already understood in his bones how the world truly works. A man who had spent his entire life being used and betrayed and thrown away, handed a second life, in a body that could grow without limit, holding a power with no ceiling at all. Most people who get a second chance get a do-over. Ezra Cole got something this world had never seen coming, and it had absolutely no idea what had just walked into it. He told no one. Soldiers never show their hand. He played the part, a quiet, fragile boy recovering from a terrible illness. But behind that door, he worked. A guard ran his sword drills in the yard below, and at the peak of one strike, a thread of pale light bled down the length of his steel and hummed in the cold air. Aura. So the magic of this world was real, and it was beautiful, and it was deadly. Cael watched from the window, once. By morning, his small hands carved the same forms through the air, flawless and silent. The motions the system handed him instantly, but that light running along the blade, phenomenon observed, aura, comprehension insufficient, that he would have to earn. And that suited him fine. He had never trusted anything that came easy. He devoured every book a third son was allowed, and then every book he wasn't. He learned the land, the coin, the way power moved through this world like blood through a body. And week by week, the household began to feel it. The boy who came back from the poisoning had come back wrong, too calm, too sharp, eyes far too old for a child's face. They began to whisper a word when they thought he couldn't hear. Monster. His own father felt it too. Lord Ardyn looked down the long table at his silver-haired third son, and a man who had feared nothing in his life felt his blood run cold. Because a third son was supposed to be nothing, harmless, forgettable. This one was none of those things, and there is nothing in all the world more dangerous than a son you cannot control. So they did what frightened, powerful men always do. They got rid of him, with a smile. They didn't dare kill him twice. The servants already talked, and a second dead son raises questions. So instead, his father gave him a gift, a title, a land of his own, at 8 years old. It sounded like mercy. It was a sentence. The land was the Greymarch, a dying scrap of cursed frontier at the very edge of the kingdom of Caldris. Dead soil, starving villages, a broken keep, bandits in the hills, and worse things in the dark beyond the border. They were handing a child a graveyard and calling it an honor, and every soul in that room knew it. They waited for him to cry. Cael Ardyn looked up at his father with those calm, ancient eyes and said only this, "Thank you, Father, I accept." Because they were all looking at a discarded boy and a worthless, dying land, and he was looking at something none of them could see, a blank page, a place so far beneath the world's notice that a man could build anything there, and no one would think to stop him until it was far, far too late. They thought they were sending a child away to die in the dark, They had no idea they had just set Wraith loose. The road took 9 days. When the wagon crested the final ridge, the Greymarch spread out below, and it was worse than the maps had promised. Gray fields to a gray horizon, a village of maybe 40 souls, hollow-cheeked and silent, watching the road the way the hunted watch the trees. A keep with its spine broken open to the sky. His escort didn't stay. They left the boy and a single trunk at the gate and turned the wagon for home before the light failed. And then it was only him, an 8-year-old in a dead lord's coat, standing alone in the ruin of the worst land in the kingdom. A normal child would have wept, but as Cael walked the broken street, the villagers crept out to look at the boy who was supposed to save them, and he saw it in their faces. Not hope. They were long past hope. Just a tired, bracing fear, waiting for the next person to come and take whatever little they had left. And then a small girl, thin as a reed, no more than 5 years old, slipped free of her mother's hands. She crossed the dirt on bare feet, and she lifted something up to him in both palms. Half a crust of bread, hard and gray, and almost certainly the last food she had in the world. "For the new Lord," she whispered. And something in Ezra Cole, something that 4 wars and a bullet in the back and a death in the rain had buried so deep he had forgotten it was even there, cracked. He knelt down in the dirt to the eye level of a starving child who had just offered a stranger her last bite of food, and gently he closed her small hands back around the bread. "Keep it," he said. "From this day on, none of you go hungry again. You have my word." He rose. He looked out over the dead fields, the broken walls, the 40 frightened people who, in that moment, became his. The first thing that had been his since the rain. And for the first time since he died, Ezra Cole had something to fight for again. "All right," he said, to the ruin and the gray sky and the whole sleeping world. "Let's build." But the Greymarch doesn't wait for anyone. That very night, as the cold came down, a glow bloomed on the northern ridge. 1 fire, then 10, then more than a frightened man could count. The old headman seized Cael's shoulder, his voice breaking. "The hollow wolves, my lord. Bandits. They ride down every harvest and take everything we have. And this year, they heard a child was sent to rule us. They've come to make an example of you." 40 starving souls, no wall, no soldiers, an 8-year-old in a dead man's coat. The hollow wolves had come to make an example of the Greymarch. They had no idea they were about to become one. The old man begged him to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there, and Cael didn't move. He watched the torches spill down the hillside, toward the little girl who had given him her last bread, toward the 40 souls who had just become his. And when he finally spoke, his voice was too calm and far too old for the small body it came from. "Get everyone inside," he said, "and whatever you hear out here tonight, Don't watch what happens next. Architect. Combat imminent. Observe, comprehend, build. Next time on the Greymarch, the Hollow Wolves find out exactly what their new boy lord brought back from the grave, and a dying land draws its first breath of something it had forgotten how to feel: hope.